Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Martin Luther King. Coming from one of the greatest civil rights activists of his time, King's words are more than ever significant in today's poisoned world of social injustices. So, what is a social injustice? A justice is fairness or administration of law. On the other hand, injustice is the opposite. It's clearly unfairness or a breaking of the law. If you take social and put it in front of injustice, you get social unfairness. Sadly, there are hundreds of social injustices in this world that need to be solved ASAP. But let's focus on one that has been haunting this country for decades now: the mass incarceration of African Americans. It is the most visible it has ever been in history right now. Racism still looms today as it has in the past, and its most prominent form is incarceration. The unfair, discriminatory jailing of African Americans has gotten out of hand. Solving this injustice hinges not only on spreading awareness, but also showing the corrupt systems what they're doing wrong and how to fix them. A recent article published by the NAACP writes perfectly the history behind this injustice, or how it came to be. It gives us 3 dates in history to clearly explain. One is slave patrols. Ever since the first slave landed on U.S. soil and centuries later, slave patrols or slave policing were made to catch any runaway slaves. They caught them and abused them and did this excessively, very brutally. After the Civil War wrapped up and slave patrols and slavery overall was abolished, number 2, the second history event, were black codes. This was another form of slavery or discrimination in the form of laws. They basically made laws that inhibited or denied us freed slaves' rights. After the 14th Amendment was passed and even black codes were abolished, it took another form of Jim Crow laws. These laws were just like black codes. They were laws that denied rights to freed slaves or African Americans. But the difference in this one is that they leaned on the new and improved police force to enforce the laws, which they did so very excessively, very brutally, and that's where all the jailing and incarceration started in the first place. Since then, even though discriminating laws have been abolished, the police's power with discrimination increased exponentially. Incarceration rates skyrocketed, and more black people and communities felt targeted and under surveillance by the white man. Let's look at some statistics to show how dangerous this problem actually is. The same article from the NAACP writes that 84% of black people say that they feel unequally harmed by the police force. What's interesting is that 63% of white people actually agree with that. Pierre Thomas of ABC News gives us a stat. He states that black people are 5 times more likely than white people to go to jail. And if you disregard the police stations in New York, Chicago, and Florida, it's actually a rate at 10 times. Black people are 10 times more likely to go to jail than the white man. And Valerie Strauss of the Washington Post states that 1/3 of black people are in jail for actual reasons. The other 2/3 could have been swapped with a white man, but there's an inequality. That's why they are not in jail. As we can see, not only through the numbers, but also the stats and the reasonings and the polls, they all show that this problem is very real and it's harming people right now. But this problem gets even worse when you look at the actual effects. Of course, the people that get jailed up and taken and get their life stolen away from them for no apparent reason, they suffer a lot. They lose time, money, and family. But let's look at even deeper. Let's look at the kids who suffer. The kids with parents that are locked up. Valerie Strauss of the Washington Post continues by saying, kids without parents that are locked up in jail are more often to misbehave, have depression, anxiety, do drugs, alcohol, PTSD, the list just goes on. The kids are suffering, and so are the people, and this problem is only getting worse as days go by. Now that we show all these numbers and the history and the effects, We know it's a very big problem. But how can people solve this? How can we solve this? An article from the American Civil Liberties Union writes 4 pieces of information that the governments can do to solve this problem. 1, they can eliminate incarceration for low-level offenses such as drug possession. 2, they can increase alternatives or substitutions for incarceration. 3, they can let people out of jail after they have proven they can re-enter society instead of forcing them to serve their full term. And lastly, they can have more checkups, kind of like what we're doing. We're having a checkup on the criminal justice system, showing what's wrong. They can make it a law and have them check themselves of what's wrong so they can fix better. But more importantly, how can we help? How can me and you from our desk chairs help this cause right now? The Sentencing Project, an organization from the American Civil Liberties Union, outlines perfectly how we can take action. This isn't just posting a black screen on social media and telling people what's happening. This is making your voice heard, telling people in your community, your teachers, and your friends of this problem. This is donating to organizations like the Sentencing Project or anything that you trust to take your word and give it more authority so it's more heard and actually makes change. And this also means joining efforts, joining protests, community meetings, and organizations to help fight the greater cause. At utmost importance, more and more people should know that African Americans are wrongly incarcerated. They're being targeted, they're being under surveillance. They feel like that by the white man, by the police force. We need to notice that this problem only gets worse as time goes on. People are only going farther away towards solving a solution. They need to come back and fight for this cause and solve a solution, or else the kids, the people, and this nation will become farther apart and divided, with more and more people dying at this point. It's sad to say that this problem has gone to death. And we have to remember that Martin Luther King had a dream. We must fulfill that dream, injustice by injustice, and push towards a morally equal world, a world with justice.